about 80,000 adults that have some college and no degree. And I'm not sure what the percentage of those is that have, these small barriers to reentering a post-secondary training program. But if we can reduce those barriers, I think that this is a really good thing for business. So.
Okay, Ms. Oslin, we have no questions. Appreciate the testimony today.
Thank you.
Davante Lewis from the Louisiana Budget Project. Do you still want to testify? Okay. You had a question? I'm sorry.
Maybe the author could answer it later. I can wait. I know we're trying to.
Okay, thank you, Representative Hilford. I'm feeling a little time crunch because we still have several bills to go through, and not least of which is Representative Zarangs. Mr. Lewis, welcome to the Committee on Education.
Chairman. Thank you, Committee. My name is Davante Lewis. I am the Director of Public Affairs and the Higher Ed Policy Analyst at the Louisiana Budget Project. And we're proud to work with Representative Emerson on this bill and continuing our work that we started last session in barriers to work. I'm just going to change up my testimony to answer some of the direct questions from the research and the policy studies that we have done to be cautious of time. We've talked a lot about what other states have done, and I will answer that. The state of California has already passed this legislation. The governor of Washington State will most likely be signing this legislation in the upcoming week, as well as the state of Ohio. I will also note that this is not only just a state issue, it's also happening federally. H.R. 3761 by Congresswoman Susie Lee of Nevada, a Democrat, and Representative Rodney Davis of Illinois, a Republican, has filed this piece of legislation to do this at the federal level. And there are also talks among the higher ed policy community to add this type of provision into any additional stimulus aid packages that have come. So we partnered with one of our policy experts in the state of Ohio, Policy Matters Ohio, that did the exact study of what we're talking about. So when you looked at the entire state of Ohio through an open records request, there were only 400,000 students at public, private, and proprietary for-profit institutions who had open accounts. That equaled about an $800 average per student of those 400,000 students. And when they calculated what would it cost the state of Ohio, including all private, public, and proprietary schools, if every account that was open was paid in full, it would result in the revenue of less than 0.8% of the annual budget of Ohio State University. So all institutions would only count for less than 1% of Ohio State University's overall. And then also what we looked at is when we went down each school, that means each school would only receive about 7 cents on the dollar for their open account, meaning their annual revenue loss collections would amount to less than 1/20th of 1% of their operating annual budget. So when we're not talking about a significant amount of money, as Dr. Henderson mentioned, that we're normally talking somewhere around hundreds to 1,000, depending at the institutions. I would also say that this does not stop private debt collections that institutions and private institutions are using. I would point you to Tulane's actual policy on debt collections, which includes a finance charge for every day that is late. They have an 18% annual percentage rate on this debt, and they also have a 25% lawyer fee if they take it to court. So those tools are already used, and we would advocate as a policy organization that most of the research has showed that transcript withholding doesn't actually solve the debt, and some of the programs that they should look into is programs that re-enroll students and that who have owed money in debt to report tuition and to come back into the institution of that choice so they're not transferring and pay down that debt. We also think this is just an important bill for the economy. When we talk about workforce and higher education in crucial times, this is a significant barrier that we see, especially with adult learners who are coming back into the field, who may have been at an institution, went off, worked on oil. As we know, the oil market and the oil job field is in a crisis, and may decide they want to come back into an institution, but they now don't have a job, or they're out of a job, now trying to figure out a way to get into an institution or get into the community college system or at UL system to get back into employment. And so we're putting them in a catch-22 where they don't have the financial resources to pay the debt, and then we're preventing them the opportunity to get the financial resources to pay the debt. This bill does not absolve debt the same way that the Barriers to Work Act that Representative Emerson and I worked on last year about the occupational licensing boards having the right to revoke a license based off of student loan debt. This simply just says we should use other alternative methods rather than holding a transcript. And the last thing I would say to directly answer Representative Phelps' question, the reason that federal student loans was written into the bill is because this is a provision, especially for our proprietary and for-profit schools. This really centered around a 2015 lawsuit from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau against ITT Tech, which would use transcript withholding based off of some other things, calling them federal student loans and using debt owed to federal student loans as a predatory practice to get additional resources. And we've seen legal scholars in Ohio, as well as the Consumer Protection Financial Bureau, really address those issues. So for all of those reasons, we stand in support of this bill, and those are just to address some of the concerns that our research has shown in the state of Louisiana. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll answer any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. We appreciate you coming to share with us today. You have a question? Hold on one second. Is that you? Did you?
I think, yeah, now I'm on.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis, for your testimony. And I want to say that I think the private institutions should be able to speak for themselves on this, because they do have methods in place to collect the debt, and I do understand that non-traditional student very well from a one-on-one personal basis. So I'm very conflicted on this. Unfortunately, none of them are here today because of COVID. So I feel like we're not getting a full vetting on this because we should have some of our private institution presidents here to discuss it. So I appreciate your perspective and your research, but I just want to point out that I want to hear directly from the private institutions on some of this.
And yes, ma'am, and this was a pre-filed bill. We had been in conversations with this bill starting since January, and none of these concerns arose until yesterday, I would like to note. And we have had private school students, the student body president, the SGA associations and students at Tulane, Loyola, LSU, I think have been emailing you and calling you, and I worked with the Louisiana Youth Platform with this bill. So there has been support and conversations about this for a few months, and of course now at the last second we're kind of hearing some of these concerns, which we would have loved to work out had those been arised when the bill was pre-filed.
Okay, thank you.
Just suggestion for the future: when you're affecting someone's ability to collect debt, you might want to call them and reach out to them.
Well, yes, sir. We sent an email to LIAC when in the discussions, and no one responded to me.
Okay.
Like you, excuse me. Yes, sir.
I appreciate that very much. No, and I'm not trying to. I was surprised last night when I was getting all the phone calls late.
Yes, sir.
Last
Yeah,
night.
we were taken back too. It's been a pre-filed bill, and no concerns were raised until last night.
Thank you for coming to testify.
Thank you,
Mr. Lewis. Representative. Oh wait, do you have a question for him, Representative Wright? I'm sorry. I apologize. The lights are not working quite well.
No worries. Mr. Lewis, your testimony and the previous one mentioned this as being a barrier, but I have not heard yet any kind of numbers of like how much of specifically the transcripts is a barrier.
Dr. Reed has, or she has some numbers for you.
And I'll defer to Dr. Reed, and I would only say the only thing I would add is the reason we don't have sometimes the specific numbers is because a student, if they have a debt and know they have no transcript, will not even attempt to look at alternative programs to attend because they know they won't be able to have the academic credit to prove that they have, of course, accomplished some credit, which means they won't come to the program. So it's a barrier that sometimes is very hard to put in an analytical state, but it's if I know I owe McNeese State University and I haven't been to school in 15 years, and I know I can get my transcript, I'm not going to even attempt to apply to Loyola because I know I'm going to start back from the beginning and not get the credit for the work that I've already done. So that's the type of barriers that are created in a process like that.
Okay. Thank you again, Dr. Lewis. We appreciate you coming today. We have a few cards in support. Dr. Kim Hunter-Reed from the Board of Regents will provide information if requested. Also in support, not wishing to speak, Susan East Nelson.